He found her crying in the snow, a decorated Marine sergeant reduced to nothing but shattered pride and a broken radio. He thought he was offering shelter from the storm, but what neither of them knew was that her desperate call for backup would become his call to live again. This is a story not of war zones and battlefields, but of quiet battles fought in small moments. A story where healing doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It whispers through shared coffee and late-night conversations. A story where two people who thought their fighting days were over discover that sometimes the most important mission is learning to trust again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the pre-dawn darkness of Thornfield Valley like a knife through silence. Harrison Brooks reached across the empty expanse of his king-sized bed to silence it, his hand finding only cold sheets where warmth had once lived. 5:30 a.m. every morning. Same time, same motion, same hollow ache that followed him from sleep into wakefulness like a faithful shadow. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, feet finding the worn slippers that had seen better days. The hardwood floor creaked beneath his weight as he moved through the two-story colonial house that had once echoed with laughter and now seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. Past the family photos he couldn't quite bring himself to take down but couldn't bear to look at directly. Past the guest room that served as a monument to plans that would never unfold. In the kitchen, Harrison went through the motions with mechanical precision. Coffee black, no sugar. 2 pieces of whole wheat toast, lightly buttered. Orange juice poured into a small glass with cartoon characters dancing around the rim. He called upstairs in a voice that had learned to project energy he didn't feel. Chloe. Breakfast. 8-year-old feet thundered down the stairs, followed by a whirlwind of blonde curls and untied shoelaces. Chloe Brooks burst into the kitchen like a small tornado, backpack sliding off one shoulder, homework folder clutched in her free hand. "Dad, I need you to sign this," she said without preamble, thrusting a permission slip under his nose. "Field trip to the Science Museum next Friday." Harrison scanned the paper quickly, signed with the same careful handwriting he'd used on legal documents for the past 15 years before, when his world had made sense and the future had stretched ahead of them, like an open road full of possibility. "Sounds fun, kiddo," he said, handing it back. "Make sure Mrs. Patterson gets this today." Chloe nodded seriously, stuffing the paper into her backpack with the concentrated focus of someone trying to remember a dozen different things at once. She ate her breakfast in companionable silence, occasionally glancing up at her father with eyes that held too much understanding for someone her age. Harrison packed her lunch with the same methodical care he brought to everything these days. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut into triangles, apple slices in a small container, juice box, goldfish crackers. A note that simply said, "Have a great day. Love, Dad," written in the same neat script, because some traditions were worth preserving. Even when everything else had fallen apart. "You okay, Daddy?" Chloe asked quietly as he zipped her lunchbox closed. The question hit him like it always did, a gentle sucker punch that reminded him how little he'd managed to hide from her perceptive 8-year-old eyes. She'd been asking some version of this question for 2 years now, ever since the accident had torn their family of 3 down to a family of 2. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "Just tired." Chloe studied his face for a moment longer, then nodded and hopped down from her chair. She'd learned not to push. This wise little girl who had inherited her mother's intuition, along with her stubborn streak. The drive to Thornfield Elementary was a 15-minute journey through winding mountain roads that Harrison could navigate in his sleep, past the old covered bridge that the town had fought to preserve, past Morrison's feed store with its hand-painted sign and the gas station where everybody knew everybody's business, past the turnoff that led to the cemetery on Hillcrest. Drive a route he'd learned to avoid without really thinking about it. He pulled into the school circular. Drive behind a line of other vehicles, watching as children spilled out of cars and buses like colorful confetti. Chloe kissed his cheek with the casual affection of a child who had never doubted she was loved, grabbed her backpack, and joined the stream of students heading toward the brick building. "Pick you up at 3, Harrison called after her. She turned and waved, her smile bright enough to temporarily chase away the shadows that seemed to follow him everywhere. Then she was gone, swallowed up by the crowd of her peers, and Harrison was alone again with the silence that had become his constant companion. The drive to his office at Brooks and Associates took him back through the heart of Thornfield Valley, past the courthouse where he'd won his first case, past the diner where he and Sarah used to grab coffee on Saturday mornings before Chloe was born, past a dozen small landmarks that had once been waypoints in a life, full of shared meaning and now served as reminders of what he'd lost. His law practice occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house on Main Street, the kind of small town firm that handled everything from divorce proceedings to property disputes. Harrison had built it from nothing over the course of 12 years, turning it into something he'd been proud of. Something that had mattered. Now it was just another piece of the routine that kept him moving forward when moving forward was the last thing he wanted to do. His secretary, Mrs. Henderson, had already sorted the morning mail and left his coffee steaming on the mahogany desk that had been Sarah's last birthday gift to him. 43 years old, and he moved through his professional life like a man twice his age, carrying the weight of responsibilities that felt heavier with each passing day. The morning brought the usual parade of clients and phone calls, a property dispute between neighbors who'd been feuding for 3 generations, a custody case that reminded him too much of his own fears, a will reading for the widow of one of Thornfield Valley's founding families. Important work, necessary work, but work that felt increasingly disconnected from anything resembling passion or purpose. By lunch, Harrison had cleared his morning appointments and found himself staring out the window at the snow-covered streets below. December had arrived early this year, blanketing the valley in a premature winter that seemed to mirror the cold that had settled in his chest and refused to leave. He ate a sandwich at his desk while reviewing case files. The silence of his office, broken only by the occasional car passing on the street below and the steady tick of the grandfather clock that had belonged to his father. The same rhythm that had marked time in his childhood home, now counting down the hours of days that felt increasingly interchangeable. 3 o'clock approached with the inevitability of tide, and Harrison found himself gathering his coat and keys for the return trip to the school. Another pickup, another brief burst of Chloe's energy to temporarily brighten the car. Another evening of homework help and bedtime stories, and trying to be enough parent for a child who deserved so much more than the hollowed-out version of himself he'd become. As he stepped outside into the crystalline air of the December afternoon, Harrison Brooks had no way of knowing that his carefully constructed routine was about to shatter. That somewhere in the woods beyond Thornfield Valley, a decorated Marine sergeant named Jocelyn Stone was crying into a broken radio, and that her desperate call for backup would become his call to remember what it felt like to truly live. Snow was beginning to fall again, and Harrison pulled his collar higher as he walked toward his car, moving with the mechanical precision of a man who had learned to survive, but had forgotten entirely how to hope. The detour wasn't planned. Harrison had been driving the same route between his office and Chloe's school for 2 years, following the main road through downtown Thornfield Valley with the predictability of a train on tracks. But today, Main Street was blocked by a water main break that had the city crews scattered around orange cones and heavy machinery, forcing traffic onto the winding back roads that cut through the forested hills surrounding the town. Harrison found himself navigating Pine Ridge Road, a narrow ribbon of asphalt that snaked through dense woods of evergreen and bare-branched oak. Snow had been falling steadily since noon, accumulating on the road surface just enough to make driving treacherous, but not quite enough to call off school. The kind of weather that made him grateful for the all-wheel drive on his Subaru and anxious about the time ticking away on his dashboard clock. He was running late. Chloe would be waiting in the school's main office with the other children whose parents had been delayed, and he hated the thought of her standing there with her backpack, scanning the faces of arriving adults and not finding his among them. It was a small thing, maybe, but in the careful architecture of grief that had become his life, small things mattered more than they should. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The radio was playing softly some forgotten classic rock station that filled the silence, without demanding attention when he saw the vehicle. It was pulled off the road about 50 yards ahead. A dark green Jeep Wrangler tilted at an odd angle with its hazard lights, blinking like a heartbeat against the white backdrop of falling snow. Harrison's first instinct was to keep driving. He wasn't particularly mechanical, wouldn't know how to help with engine trouble, and Chloe was waiting. But as he drew closer, something made him ease off the accelerator. Maybe it was the lawyer in him, trained to notice details that others might miss. Maybe it was the father in him, conditioned to worry about people stranded in bad weather. Or maybe it was something deeper, some part of himself that had been sleeping for 2 years and was finally stirring to life. The Jeep's driver's side door was open, and he could see a figure hunched over what looked like a radio or communication device. As his car drew alongside, Harrison caught a glimpse of the person inside, a woman with short dark hair, wearing military fatigues, her shoulders shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. She was crying. Harrison pulled over without really making a conscious decision to do so, his hazard lights joining hers in their synchronized plea for attention. He sat for a moment with the engine running, watching the woman through the swirl of snowflakes, and felt something he hadn't experienced in months, the urge to help someone who wasn't his daughter. The woman looked up as he approached, and Harrison saw a face that was striking in its combination of strength and vulnerability. High cheekbones, dark eyes rimmed with red, a jawline that suggested someone accustomed to command, but was now slack with exhaustion or despair. She wore the uniform of a United States Marine, sergeant stripes visible on her sleeve, but she looked nothing like the recruiting poster image of military precision. She looked broken. "Ma'am," Harrison called out, raising his voice over the wind. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" The woman sergeant, he corrected himself, noting the rank insignia, looked at him with eyes that seemed to be seeing him from a great distance. She held up a black radio handset, its antenna extended, and Harrison could hear the faint crackle of static. "It's dead," she said, her voice hoarse. "The radio's dead, and I can't." She trailed off, looking down at the device in her hands like it had personally betrayed her. "Are you hurt?" Harrison asked, moving closer. "Do you need me to call someone?" "No," she said quickly, then seemed to reconsider. "I mean, yes, maybe, I don't know." She looked up at him again, and Harrison saw something in her expression that he recognized, the look of someone who had been holding everything together for so long that they'd forgotten how to ask for help. "I'm Harrison," he said gently. "Harrison. Brooks, what's your name?" "Jocelyn," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Jocelyn Stone. Sergeant Jocelyn Stone." "Okay, Sergeant Stone, what's going on? What can I do to help?" Jocelyn looked down at the radio again, her fingers working over the controls with the frustrated precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing but was getting no response. "I was supposed to check in," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Every 4 hours I'm supposed to check in, and I can't. The battery died, and I don't have a backup, and they're going to think." She stopped, pressing her lips together in a hard line, and Harrison realized she was fighting back tears. Whatever this check-in was about, it mattered a lot. "Who are "You supposed to check in with?" he asked. "My unit," she said. I'm supposed to be on medical leave, but there are protocols. And if I don't check in ... She took a shaky breath. "They'll send someone looking for me." Harrison studied her face, noting the way she held herself ramrod, straight despite the circumstances, trained to maintain composure even when falling apart. He didn't know much about military procedure, but he understood the weight of responsibility. The fear of letting people down. "When did you last check in?" he asked. Jocelyn glanced at her watch, a heavy black digital model that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. 6 hours ago. I was supposed to call in at 1400 hours, but I got ... lost. The word came out like a confession. "I've been driving around these back roads for hours, trying to find cell service, trying to get this piece of junk radio to work." Harrison pulled out his phone, checking the signal strength. 2 bars not strong, but potentially workable. "I've got some cell service," he said. "Do you have a number you can call?" Hope flickered across Jocelyn's features for the first time since he'd approached. "You'd let me use your phone?" "Of course," Harrison said, handing it over. "Take your time." Jocelyn dialed with shaking fingers, held the phone to her ear, and waited. Harrison watched her face fall as the call failed to connect, tried again, got the same result. "Nothing," she said, handing the phone back. "The storm must be interfering with the towers." They stood there for a moment in the falling snow, 2 strangers brought together by circumstance and mechanical failure. Harrison found himself studying Jocelyn's face, noting the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the way she held her shoulders like she was carrying invisible weight. "Look," he said finally, "I know we just met, but I live about 10 minutes from here. Good landline connection, warm house, hot coffee. Why don't you come with me? Get that radio charged up or use my phone to make your call." Jocelyn looked at him suspiciously. "You don't even know me." "No," Harrison agreed. "But you're a Marine, you're in trouble, and it's snowing. My daughter's at school for another hour anyway. I was on my way to pick her up when I saw you." He paused. "Sometimes helping someone else is the right thing to do, even when you don't know the whole story." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Jocelyn nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Thank you. I'll follow you in my Jeep. Will it start?" She turned the key, and the engine caught on the second try. "Yeah, it runs fine. It's just the radio that's shot." As Harrison walked back to his car, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. The sense that he was needed for something beyond the basic maintenance of his own existence. It was a small thing, helping a stranded Marine make a phone call, but it felt significant in a way he couldn't quite articulate. He had no way of knowing that Jocelyn Stone's radio call would change everything. That her story would become entwined with his in ways neither of them could imagine. That the broken radio in her hands was about to become the catalyst for rebuilding 2 lives that had been quietly falling apart. All he knew was that someone needed help, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt capable of providing it. Harrison's house sat at the end of Maple Creek Lane, a 2-story colonial with weathered blue shutters and a wraparound porch that had seen better days. The driveway curved through tall pine trees that provided natural privacy from the road, and as he pulled up with Jocelyn's Jeep following close behind, he found himself seeing his home through a stranger's eyes for the first time in months. Automatic garage door rumbled open, and he gestured for Jocelyn to park beside his car. She climbed out of the driver's seat, moving stiffly, like someone who had been driving for hours with tension locked in every muscle. Her military fatigues were wrinkled, her boots scuffed with road salt, and she carried that broken radio like it was made of glass. "Chloe," Harrison called to his daughter as she unbuckled her seatbelt. "We have a guest. Sergeant Stone is going to use our phone." 8-year-old Chloe emerged from the back seat with the unself-conscious curiosity that children possessed in abundance. She studied Jocelyn with wide blue eyes, taking in the uniform, the serious expression, the way the woman held herself like she was still standing at attention even in civilian surroundings. "Are you a soldier?" Chloe asked with characteristic directness. "Marine," Jocelyn corrected gently, something shifting in her posture at the child's innocent question. "There's a difference. What's the difference?" Harrison stepped in before Jocelyn could answer, sensing that his unexpected guest might not be in the mood for an impromptu military education session. "Let's get inside where it's warm first, then we can talk," he said. "Chloe, can you get the door?" The mudroom connected to a kitchen that had been the heart of their home back when it had truly been a home, and not just a place where Harrison and Chloe went through the motions of daily life. Pine cabinets, granite countertops that Sarah had insisted on, a breakfast nook with built-in seating where they'd shared countless meals as a family of 3. "Phone's over there," Harrison said, pointing to the landline mounted on the wall beside the refrigerator. "Should have a good connection. Take your time." Jocelyn approached the phone with the focused intensity of someone for whom this call represented more than simple communication. She dialed a long number, waited, then spoke in the crisp, professional tone that Harrison was beginning to recognize as her default mode. "This is Sergeant Stone, service number ... She rattled off a series of digits. "Checking in per protocol." "Yes, sir. No, sir. Just equipment failure. Yes, I understand." 800 tomorrow. Understood. Understood. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but Harrison watched the tension drain from Jocelyn's shoulders like water from a broken dam. She hung up the phone and stood there for a moment with her eyes closed, breathing deeply. "Better?" Harrison asked. "Better," she confirmed, turning to face him. "Thank you. I can't tell you how much that means." "No need to thank me for using the phone," Harrison said, moving toward the coffee maker. "Coffee? You look like you could use some. I don't want to impose ... You're not imposing." He was already measuring grounds, muscle memory taking over. "Besides, Chloe was going to interrogate you about the Marines anyway. Might as well be comfortable while it happens." Chloe had arranged herself at the kitchen table with her homework spread out in front of her, but Harrison could tell she was listening to every word. She'd inherited her mother's ability to multitask, appearing to focus on one thing while actually absorbing everything happening around her. "Do you fight bad guys?" Chloe asked without looking up from her math worksheet. Jocelyn sat down across from her, moving carefully like someone who wasn't sure she was welcome. "Sometimes," she said, "but mostly I help people. Marines help people." "My dad helps people too," Chloe said matter-of-factly. "He's a lawyer. That means he argues with people for money." "Chloe," Harrison warned, but he was smiling despite himself. "It's true," Chloe protested. "You said so yourself. You said lawyers argue for a living." Jocelyn laughed, a real laugh that transformed her face completely. "Well, when you put it like that ... Harrison poured coffee into 2 mugs, adding cream to his own and offering the container to Jocelyn. She took it black, no sugar, which somehow didn't surprise him. He set the mug in front of her and watched her wrap her hands around it like she was drawing warmth from more than just the ceramic. "How old are you?" Chloe asked, abandoning any pretense of doing homework. "Chloe, that's not polite ... It's fine," Jocelyn said. "I'm 28. How old are you?" 8 3/4, Chloe replied with the precision of someone for whom fractions of years mattered enormously. "My birthday's in March. I'm going to be 9. "March birthdays are good," Jocelyn said seriously. "Spring birthdays mean new beginnings." Something about the way she said it made Harrison look at her more closely. There was a story there, layers of meaning beneath the simple words, but he didn't push. Instead, he opened the refrigerator and began assembling the components of an early dinner. "Are you hungry?" he asked, I was going to make grilled cheese and tomato soup. Nothing fancy, but ... I don't want to be a bother." "You're not a bother," Harrison said firmly. "Honestly, it's nice to have someone to cook for besides just us. I usually make too much anyway." It was a lie. He usually made exactly enough for two. But something about Jocelyn's careful posture, the way she held herself like she was ready to bolt at the first sign of unwelcome, made him want to put her at ease. "Can I help?" she asked. "Just sit," Harrison said. "Relax, you've had a long day." He moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, buttering bread, opening cans, warming the soup in a pot that had seen thousands of meals. Domestic tasks that had once felt meaningful when shared with Sarah, then burdensome when performed. Alone, now somehow felt purposeful again, with Jocelyn sitting at his table. "Where do you live?" Chloe asked, apparently conducting her own interview. "Different places," Jocelyn said carefully. "I move around a lot for work. That sounds lonely." The simple observation hung in the air like a challenge. Harrison glanced over from the stove to see Jocelyn's expression grow thoughtful. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but you get used to it." "I don't think I'd like moving around all the time," Chloe continued. "I like it here. This is home." "It's a nice home," Jocelyn said, looking around the kitchen with genuine appreciation. "You can tell people are happy here." Harrison felt something twist in his chest. Happy? Were they happy? He'd been focused so intensely on survival, on maintaining routine and keeping Chloe's world stable, that he'd stopped thinking about happiness as a possibility. "We try," he said simply. Dinner was a quiet affair, punctuated by Chloe's occasional questions and Jocelyn's increasingly relaxed responses. Harrison found himself studying his unexpected guest when she wasn't looking, noting the way she ate with mechanical precision, the way she sat with perfect posture even in the casual setting, the way she seemed to be cataloging every detail of their home, like she was storing it away for later. "Do you have kids?" Chloe asked as they finished eating. "No," Jocelyn said, her voice growing quiet. "No kids." "Do you want kids?" Chloe ... double quotes Harrison began. "It's okay," Jocelyn said. "I used to think I did. Maybe someday." Something in her tone suggested that someday felt very far away. Harrison began clearing the dishes, and this time when Jocelyn offered to help, he accepted. They worked in comfortable silence, falling into an easy rhythm of washing and drying that felt surprisingly natural. "Thank you," Jocelyn said as they finished, "for everything. The phone, the meal, the ... kindness. I know you didn't have to help a stranger." "Everyone needs help sometimes," Harrison replied. "Besides, you're not really a stranger anymore. You've had dinner with us. That makes you practically family." It was meant as a light comment, but something flickered across Jocelyn's face, surprise, maybe, or longing. Like the concept of family was both foreign and deeply desired. "I should go," she said. "Let you get back to your evening." "Where are you staying?" Harrison asked. The question hung in the air, and Harrison realized from Jocelyn's hesitation that she didn't have a good answer. The broken radio, the hours of driving, the desperate need to check in with her unit pieces of a larger puzzle that suggested someone who was more lost than she'd initially let on. "There's a hotel in town," she said finally. "In this weather?" Harrison glanced toward the window where snow was still falling steadily. "The roads are getting worse. I'll be fine. I've driven in worse conditions." But even as she said it, Harrison could see the uncertainty in her eyes, could see that she was exhausted, that the prospect of driving back into the storm to find lodging in an unfamiliar town felt overwhelming. "The guest room upstairs has clean sheets," he said quietly. "If you want to stay, no pressure, but the offer's there." Jocelyn looked at him for a long moment, then at Chloe, who was nodding enthusiastically. "Really?" "Really," Harrison said. "It's warm, it's safe, and there's a good chance the roads will be better in the morning. I don't know what to say." Say yes, Chloe piped up. We never have sleepovers anymore. Jocelyn smiled at that, the first truly unguarded expression Harrison had seen from her. Okay, she said. Yes, thank you. As Harrison showed her to the guest room, he realized that for the first time in months, his house felt like a home again. Not because of grand gestures or dramatic changes, but because someone who needed shelter had found it under his roof. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding something he'd thought was lost forever. Morning arrived in Thornfield Valley with the soft gray light that followed a heavy snowfall, the kind of illumination that made everything look clean and possible again. Harrison woke earlier than usual, drawn from sleep by the unfamiliar sound of someone moving quietly through his house. For a moment, the domestic noise filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in 2 years, the simple comfort of not being alone. He found Jocelyn in the kitchen, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in her hands, watching the snow-covered landscape beyond the glass. She'd traded her military fatigues for civilian clothes jeans, and a simple gray sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable somehow. Her dark hair caught the morning light, and Harrison noticed for the first time that she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with strength, tempered by pain. You're up early, he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, offering a small smile. Old habit. Military training never really leaves you. She gestured toward the coffee maker. I hope you don't mind. I found everything I needed. Of course not. Thank you for making coffee. Harrison poured himself a mug, noting that she'd made it stronger than he usually preferred, but somehow exactly what he needed this morning. How did you sleep? Better than I have in weeks, Jocelyn admitted. Your guest room is comfortable. And quiet. I'd forgotten what real quiet sounds like. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both looking out at the transformed landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that looked pristine and unmarked, full of potential. Can I ask you something? Harrison said finally. Jocelyn tensed slightly, but nodded. What's a Marine sergeant doing driving around back roads in Vermont? I mean, I'm grateful the circumstances brought you here, but you seem... He paused, searching for the right words. You seem like someone who's far from where you're supposed to be. Jocelyn was quiet for so long that Harrison began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm on medical leave, she said. Mandatory. My commanding officer thought I needed time to process some things. What kind of things? She turned away from the window, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed defensively. I lost someone. Someone I was responsible for. Someone who shouldn't have died, but did because I made the wrong call at the wrong moment. The words hung in the kitchen air like a confession. Harrison felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than sympathy. What happened? He asked gently. His name was Miguel Santos, Jocelyn said, staring down into her coffee. 22 years old, from Phoenix. Joined the Marines to pay for college, wanted to be a teacher when he got out. He was under my command during a patrol in... She stopped, shook her head. It doesn't matter where. What matters is that I made a decision that got him killed. Harrison watched her face carefully, seeing the way grief had carved itself into her features. What kind of decision? The kind that seems right in the moment and haunts you for the rest of your life. Jocelyn's voice was steady, but Harrison could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. We were supposed to check a building, routine. Sweep. I could have sent someone else. Should have sent someone else. But Miguel was young and eager, and I thought... I thought it would be good experience for him. She paused, took a shaky breath. There was an IED, improvised explosive device, hidden in the doorframe. Miguel was the first one through the door because I told him to be. Because I thought I was teaching him something about leadership. Her laugh was bitter, hollow. I taught him something about leadership, all right. I taught him what it looks like when your leader gets you killed. Harrison set down his coffee mug and moved closer, recognizing the particular weight of survivor's guilt because he carried the same burden. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? Jocelyn looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone. Not yet 30. I gave the order. I made the call. I'm the one who walked away while they carried him out in a body bag. You couldn't have known about the explosive. That's what everyone says. My commanding officer, the chaplain, the therapist they make me see twice a week. You couldn't have known, Sergeant Stone. It's not your fault, Sergeant Stone. These things happen in combat, Sergeant Stone. She shook her head. But I was responsible for him. That's what command means. You're responsible for the people under you. And I failed. Harrison studied her face, seeing something he recognized too well. How long ago? 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. The precision of her answer told him everything he needed to know about how the loss was eating at her. And you've been carrying this alone. That's what you do. You carry it and you keep going because that's the job. Harrison leaned against the counter beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I know something about carrying guilt alone. Something in his tone made Jocelyn look at him more closely. What do you mean? My wife, Sarah, Harrison said quietly. She died 2 years ago. Car accident on Route 9, just outside of town. Black. Ice, lost control, hit a tree. He paused, the familiar tightness settling in his chest. I was supposed to drive her that night. She was going to her book club meeting at the library, and I was supposed to pick her up afterward, but I got caught up in a case I was working on. Some stupid property dispute that seemed so important at the time. Jocelyn waited, not pushing, just listening. She called me around 9, said the meeting was running late, and she'd just drive herself home. I said okay, figured it would save me a trip. Went back to my paperwork. Harrison's voice grew rougher. The call came in at 9:47. State Police. Said there'd been an accident. Said I needed to get to the hospital right away. By the time I got there, he couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. If I'd just done what I was supposed to do, if I just picked her up like we'd planned, she'd still be alive. Chloe would still have her mother. I wouldn't be trying to figure out how to raise a daughter alone while pretending I'm not falling apart. They stood in silence, 2 people who had each made split-second decisions that had cost them everything. That mattered. It's not the same thing, Jocelyn said finally. You were just trying to work, trying to provide for your family. I was in a combat zone. I should have known better. Should you? Harrison turned to face her fully. Or are you doing what I've been doing for 2 years, replaying the same moment over and over, looking for the magic words or actions that would change everything? Jocelyn's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for months. I keep thinking about his mother. Miguel's mother. She writes me letters sometimes, tells me it's not my fault, that she doesn't blame me. But how can she not blame me? I blame me. Because grief isn't logical, Harrison said softly. Because sometimes the people we lose wouldn't want us to carry. They're death like a stone for the rest of our lives. Because sometimes forgiveness comes from places we don't expect it. How do you know that? Harrison managed a small smile. Because Sarah used to say that guilt was just love with nowhere to go. And Miguel's mother keeps writing to you because she sees something in you that you can't see in yourself. Jocelyn wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I haven't been sleeping. Haven't been eating right. My commanding officer says if I don't start dealing with this properly, they'll discharge me. And being a Marine is all I know how to be. It's all I've ever been good at. That's not true, Harrison said. I watched you with Chloe last night. You were patient with her questions, kind to her curiosity. You know how to connect with people, how to make them feel seen. That's not just being a Marine, that's being human. I don't feel very human most days. I know the feeling. Harrison reached over and gently touched her arm. "But you're here. You're standing in my kitchen, drinking coffee, talking about things that matter. That's more human than I've felt in 2 years." Jocelyn looked at him with something that might have been hope. "What do we do with it? This guilt, this weight we carry?" "I don't know," Harrison admitted. "I've been trying to figure that out since the night Sarah died. But maybe we don't have to figure it out alone." The sound of small feet on the stairs interrupted them, and Chloe appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her favorite pajamas and carrying a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the emotional weight that had been filling the room. "Are we having pancakes? Sergeant Stone, do you like pancakes?" Jocelyn smiled through her tears. "I love pancakes. Dad makes the best pancakes in Vermont," Chloe announced with the confidence of someone who had conducted extensive research on the subject. As Harrison moved to gather ingredients, he caught Jocelyn's eye across the kitchen. Something had shifted between them in the past few minutes. Some wall had come down that couldn't be rebuilt. They were no longer strangers sharing temporary shelter from a storm. They were two people who understood what it meant to lose everything and somehow keep breathing anyway. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Harrison didn't feel quite so alone with his grief. The pancakes had been a success. Chloe was dressed and ready for school, and the morning routine was proceeding with the kind of easy normalcy that Harrison hadn't experienced in his house for months. Jocelyn had seamlessly integrated herself into their breakfast rhythm, helping Chloe with her backpack, listening to an 8-year-old's detailed explanation of why Friday was the best day of the school week, even braiding Chloe's hair with the precise efficiency of someone accustomed to making things neat and orderly. "I like her," Chloe whispered to Harrison as he packed her lunch. "She's not trying too hard to be nice. She's just nice." It was a perceptive observation from someone who had endured 2 years of well-meaning adults who spoke to her in overly cheerful voices and treated her like she might break if they mentioned her mother. Jocelyn, by contrast, talked to Chloe like she was a real person with real thoughts worth hearing. After dropping Chloe at school, Harrison and Jocelyn returned to the house to find themselves in the strange situation of two relative strangers, spending an unplanned day together. The roads were clear enough for Jocelyn to leave if she wanted to. The morning sun had already begun melting the previous night's snow, but neither of them seemed eager to break the fragile connection they'd built over coffee and shared confessions. "I should probably get going," Jocelyn said without much conviction, standing in the foyer with her hands shoved deep in her jacket pockets. "Let you get back to your normal day." "What's normal about any of this?" Harrison asked, gesturing around his house. "Besides, I took the day off. First time in 6 months, actually. Figured the world wouldn't end if Brooks and Associates was closed for one Friday." "Why did you take the day off?" Harrison considered the question. "Honestly, because for the first time in 2 years, I woke up curious about what might happen next. That seemed worth exploring." Jocelyn smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "In that case, maybe I could help you with something around the house. I'm pretty handy with repairs, and I owe you for last night." "You don't owe me anything," Harrison said. "But if you want to stay, I'd like the company." They spent the morning working on small projects that Harrison had been putting off for months. Jocelyn fixed the squeaky hinge on the pantry door, helped him replace a burned-out light fixture in the dining room, and demonstrated an impressive knowledge of basic plumbing while adjusting the faucet in the guest bathroom. She worked with the focused intensity Harrison was beginning to recognize as characteristic, approaching each task like it was a mission to be completed rather than simple household maintenance. It was while they were organizing tools in the basement that Jocelyn noticed the door. "What's through there?" she asked, nodding toward a white-painted door tucked beneath the staircase. Unlike every other door in the house, this one had a deadbolt lock installed, and the brass keyhole looked like it hadn't been used in a long Time. Harrison followed her gaze and felt the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied any mention of that particular space. Storage, he said quickly. Just old stuff we don't need anymore. But Jocelyn had spent enough time reading people in high-stress situations to recognize deflection when she heard it. She studied Harrison's face, noting the way his jaw had tensioned. The way he'd suddenly become very interested in organizing a toolbox that had been perfectly organized already. You know, she said carefully, in the Marines, we have a saying, the thing you're most afraid to do is usually the thing you most need to do. It's just storage. Harrison repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. Harrison, Jocelyn said. Down the wrench she'd been holding and turned to face him fully. Yesterday you helped me make the phone call I was terrified to make. You gave me shelter when I needed it most. You listened to me talk about the worst thing I've ever done without judging me for it. Maybe it's time to let someone return the favor. They stood in the basement silence for a long moment, concrete walls and exposed pipes bearing witness to a conversation that felt larger than the words being spoken. It's Sarah's office, Harrison said finally. Her home office. I locked it the day after the funeral and haven't been back inside since. What's in there? Everything. The word came out rough, like it had been scraped from somewhere deep. Her computer, her books, her case files from when she worked part-time for the public defender's office. Her coffee mug, still sitting on the desk with a ring of dried coffee in the bottom. Her reading glasses, her pens, her... He stopped, pressed his lips together. Everything that made it her space. Jocelyn nodded slowly. And you're afraid that if you go in there, it'll either hurt too much or not hurt enough. The accuracy of her observation hit Harrison like a physical blow. Something like that. When Miguel died, Jocelyn said quietly, I kept his last letter to his mother in my pocket for 3 months. Carried it everywhere, but couldn't bring myself to read it. I was terrified that it would say something about how excited he was for the mission, how much he trusted me to keep him safe. Did you ever read it? Eventually. It was about a girl he'd met on leave, how he was planning to propose when he got home, how he was saving up for a ring. Jocelyn's voice grew soft. He never mentioned the mission at all. It was just life, hope, the future he was planning. How did that make you feel? Like he was a whole person instead of just my guilt. She looked at Harrison directly. Sometimes the things we're afraid to face aren't as terrible as the stories we tell ourselves. And sometimes they're exactly as terrible, but facing them is still better than carrying them around like poison. Harrison walked over to the locked door, resting his palm against the painted wood. Behind this barrier was 2 years' worth of avoidance, 2 years of telling himself he wasn't ready, 2 years of pretending that keeping Sarah's space exactly as she'd left, it was somehow honoring her memory instead of imprisoning himself with it. I don't even know where I put the key, he said. Top shelf of your kitchen junk drawer, Jocelyn said. Next to the rubber bands and the takeout menus. Harrison stared at her. How could you possibly know that? Because that's where my dad kept the key to my mom's sewing room after she died. Some things are universal. Jocelyn moved to stand beside him. The question is, do you want to find it? Harrison thought about Chloe, who had stopped asking about Mommy's office months ago, but still sometimes stood in front of the basement door with a puzzled expression, like she was trying to remember what was missing. He thought about Sarah, who had been the most forward-thinking person he'd ever known, who would have been horrified to learn that he'd turned her workspace into a shrine to paralysis. Yeah, he said. I think I do. The key was exactly where Jocelyn had predicted, hidden beneath rubber bands and expired coupons like a small brass secret. Harrison held it in his palm for a moment, feeling its weight, before heading back downstairs. With Jocelyn following quietly behind, the lock turned easily despite 2 years of disuse. The door swung open with a soft creak, and Harrison was immediately hit with the scent of Sarah's perfume, faint but unmistakable, like she'd just stepped out for coffee and would be back any moment. The office was exactly as she'd left it. Law books arranged by subject on built-in shelves. Her desk positioned to catch the morning light from the small basement window. A framed photo of Harrison and baby Chloe sitting next to her computer monitor. A half-finished brief still displayed. On her computer screen, cursor blinking patiently after the words, "In conclusion," the defendant's rights were clearly. But instead of the overwhelming grief Harrison had expected, he felt something else: gratitude. This room wasn't a tomb, it was evidence of a life fully lived, work that had mattered, a person who had made a difference. She was working on a case, he said, more to himself than to Jocelyn. What kind of case? Harrison moved closer to the computer, reading the brief Sarah had been writing. Child custody. Single mother trying to keep her kids after her ex-husband claimed she was unfit because she worked 2 jobs to support them. He scrolled down, seeing Sarah's careful arguments, her passionate defense of a woman she'd probably never met, but whose story had clearly moved her. Did she win? I don't know. I never followed up, never found out what happened to any of her cases. Harrison felt a wave of shame. I just walked away from all of it. Maybe it's not too late to find out, Jocelyn suggested gently. Harrison looked around the office with new eyes, seeing not a monument to loss but a reminder of purpose. Sarah hadn't just been his wife and Chloe's mother. She'd been a lawyer who fought for people who needed fighting for, a person who believed in justice and compassion and the possibility that one person could make a difference. She would have liked you, he said suddenly. What makes you think so? Because you see things clearly. Because you don't let people hide from what they need to face. Because you understand that sometimes helping someone else is the only way to help yourself. Harrison turned away from the computer. She always said the best lawyers were the ones who remembered that behind every case was a human being who needed someone to care. They stood in Sarah's office for a few more minutes, not talking, just breathing in the space that had been locked away for too long. When they finally left, Harrison didn't lock the door behind them. Some doors, once opened, were meant to stay that way. The revelation came 3 hours later, as Harrison sat at Sarah's desk with Jocelyn beside him, scrolling through files that had been waiting patiently on the computer's hard drive for someone to care about them again. What had started as a tentative exploration of Sarah's digital workspace had evolved into something approaching detective work, as they pieced together the cases she'd been working on in the weeks before her death. "Look at this," Harrison said, pointing to a folder labeled Rodriguez v. Rodriguez, urgent. She was working overtime on this one. Filed her last motion the day before she died. Jocelyn leaned closer to read the screen. What happened with it? Harrison's fingers moved across the keyboard, accessing court records through his law firm's database. The case file painted a familiar story. Maria Rodriguez, working 2 jobs as a housekeeper and night shift factory worker, fighting to retain custody of her 3 children after her ex-husband claimed she was neglecting them due to her work schedule. Sarah had been representing her pro bono, building a case that demonstrated Maria's devotion to her children and the economic necessities that drove her grueling schedule. The final hearing was scheduled for the week after Sarah's accident. Harrison said, scrolling through court documents. When she didn't show up, the judge assigned a different public defender. And Harrison's jaw tightened as he read the outcome. Maria lost. The kids went to live with their father and his new wife in Colorado. The substitute lawyer wasn't prepared, didn't have Sarah's research, didn't understand the case. He looked up from the screen. "Those children got taken away from their mother because I was too lost in my own grief to follow through on Sarah's work. That's not your fault, isn't it?" Harrison stood abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out onto the backyard. Sarah spent weeks on this case, stayed up late building arguments, fighting for this family. And when she died, I just abandoned them. left them to fend for themselves in a system that didn't care. Jocelyn studied the case file, noting the meticulous detail of Sarah's preparation, the passionate language of her motions. When did this happen? 2 years ago. The kids are probably settled in Colorado by now, probably don't even remember Vermont. Harrison's voice was bitter with self-recrimination. Too late to fix it. Maybe not. Jocelyn had pulled up additional court documents, her expression growing thoughtful. Look at this. There's been a change in circumstances. The father filed for divorce from his second wife 6 months ago. Ugly custody battle over their own child. Allegations of financial irresponsibility. Unstable housing situation. Harrison moved back to the desk, reading over her shoulder. So Maria Rodriguez might have grounds for a custody modification. If her situation has improved, if she can demonstrate stability, if she has a lawyer who actually understands her case. Jocelyn looked up at him. You could finish what Sarah started. I'm not a family law attorney. I do property disputes and contract negotiations. But you understand how to research, how to build arguments, how to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. Jocelyn's voice grew more animated, and I could help. I know about investigations, about gathering evidence, about finding people who don't want to be found. Harrison stared at her. You want to track down Maria Rodriguez? I want to finish what your wife started, Jocelyn said simply. I want to do something that matters instead of sitting around feeling sorry for myself. For the first time since opening Sarah's office, Harrison felt something besides grief. He felt possibility. She might not even want to reopen the case. He said, 2 years is a long time. She might have moved on, built a new life. Or she might be lying awake every night missing her children and wondering why no one cared enough to keep fighting for her. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow, partly because they were true and partly because they could have been describing his own sleepless nights for the past 2 years. Even if we found her, even if she wanted to pursue it, family court. Cases like this. They're expensive, time-consuming, emotionally brutal. I couldn't charge her. She obviously doesn't have money for a lawyer, and I can't afford to work for free indefinitely. What if you didn't have to? Jocelyn pulled up another folder on Sarah's computer, this one labeled Pro Bono Project Notes. Look at this. Your wife was planning something bigger. She was researching how to establish a legal aid clinic, partnering with other attorneys to provide free representation for custody cases. Harrison read through Sarah's notes with growing amazement. Detailed plans for approaching local attorneys about donating time, research into grant funding for legal aid organizations, contact information for family court judges who might support, expanded pro bono services, even preliminary sketches for a small office space that could serve as headquarters for what she was calling the Family First Legal Initiative. She never told me about this, Harrison said quietly. Maybe she was waiting for the right time. Maybe she wanted to have it more developed before she presented it to you. Jocelyn scrolled through pages of Sarah's careful planning. Or maybe she knew you'd try to talk her out of it because it would be financially risky for your firm. That last observation stung because it was probably accurate. Harrison had always been the cautious one in their marriage, the one who worried about overhead costs and stable income streams. Sarah had been the dreamer, the idealist who believed that doing the right thing would somehow work out financially. This would be a massive undertaking, Harrison said. We're talking about reorganizing my entire practice, bringing in other attorneys, securing funding, establishing protocols. We're talking about finishing what she started, Jocelyn corrected. We're talking about making her death mean something, instead of just being an ending. Harrison looked around the office that had been sealed off for 2 years, seeing it now as Sarah must have seen it, not just a workspace, but a launching pad for something that could make a real difference in people's lives. He thought about Chloe, who would grow up either knowing that her mother's death had led to something meaningful, or knowing that her father had been too paralyzed by grief to honor her mother's vision. "Where would we even start?" he asked. "With Maria Rodriguez," Jocelyn said. "One case, one family. We find her, we help her if she wants help, and we learn what we need to know to help the next family. And after that? After that, we figure out how to turn your wife's dream into reality." Jocelyn's expression was more animated than Harrison had seen since meeting her. "We build something that lasts, something that helps people who need help." Harrison thought about Miguel Santos, the young Marine who had died under Jocelyn's command, who had wanted to be a teacher when his service ended. About Sarah, who had died while working late on a case for a client who couldn't pay her. About all the ways that good intentions could be cut short by circumstances beyond anyone's control. "It won't bring them back," he said. "No," Jocelyn agreed. "But it might give their deaths meaning. And it might help us figure out how to live with ourselves." Harrison looked at Sarah's computer screen, still displaying her unfinished brief for Maria Rodriguez, cursor still blinking after the words, "In conclusion, the defendant's rights were clearly ... After 2 years, that sentence was finally going to be completed. "Okay," he said. "Let's find Maria Rodriguez." "Really? Really?" Harrison felt something he hadn't experienced since the night Sarah died. The sense that he had work to do that mattered. "But first, we need to pick up Chloe from school. She's going to want to hear about this." As they prepared to leave Sarah's office, Harrison realized that opening that locked door had done more than just confront his grief. It had reminded him who he was supposed to be, not just a man trying to survive the loss of his wife, but a lawyer who could fight for people who needed fighting for. And for the first time in 2 years, that felt like enough of a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Finding Maria Rodriguez turned out to be easier than Harrison had expected, and more heartbreaking than Jocelyn had prepared for. 3 phone calls to local social services, a conversation with a former neighbor, and a drive to the east side of Thornfield Valley led them to a small apartment complex where Maria worked as the building superintendent in exchange for reduced rent. She answered the door wearing work clothes and a wary expression that immediately shifted to recognition when Harrison introduced himself as Sarah Brooks's husband. Maria was smaller than Harrison had imagined, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and hands that spoke of years of physical labor. But her eyes held the same fierce determination that had impressed Sarah enough to take her case. "Pro bono, Mr. Brooks," Maria said, switching from Spanish to accented English as she invited them inside. "I was so sorry to hear about your wife. She was fighting for my children when she died, yes?" "Yes," Harrison said simply. "And I'm here because I'd like to finish what she started." The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours and required 3 boxes of tissues. Maria had spent the past 2 years working multiple jobs, attending English classes, and saving every penny in the hope that someday she might be able to afford another lawyer to help her regain custody of her children. She showed them letters from her kids' stilted, formal communications that suggested children who were being coached on what to write to their mother. "Miguel is 15 now," Maria said, showing them a school photo of a serious-looking boy with her eyes. "Ana is 13, and little Carlos just turned 11. They are good kids, but they don't know me anymore. When I call, they are polite but distant, like I am a stranger." Jocelyn leaned forward. "Have you been able to visit them?" "Twice a year, supervised visits. 1 hour each time with a social worker watching everything we do." Maria's voice broke slightly. "Carlos, he used to climb on my lap and tell me stories. Now he sits across the room and answers questions with yes or no." Harrison pulled out his laptop and began taking notes, falling back into the familiar rhythm of client consultation. But as Maria's story unfolded, the economic desperation that had driven her work schedule, the ex-husband who had used the system to punish her for divorcing him, the substitute lawyer who had been too overwhelmed to properly advocate for her. Harrison felt anger building in his chest. Not the helpless rage that had consumed him after Sarah's death, but the focused indignation of a lawyer who recognized injustice. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said finally, "I want to be clear about something. Taking on a custody modification case like THIS, it's going to be complicated, expensive, and emotionally difficult. There are no guarantees, and the process could take months or even years." Maria nodded. "I understand. But," Harrison continued, "your circumstances have clearly improved since the original custody ruling. You have stable housing, steady employment, documentation of your efforts to better your situation. And your ex-husband's circumstances have apparently deteriorated significantly. I think you have grounds for a strong case." Hope flickered across Maria's features like sunrise. "You will represent me? Pro bono," Harrison confirmed. "No charge. And I'm going to do everything in my power to bring your children home." As they drove back toward Harrison's house, Jocelyn was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. "That could have been my mother's story," she said. "Different details, but the same struggle. Working multiple jobs, fighting a system designed to favor people with money and connections. What happened to your mother? She won, eventually. But it took 3 years and nearly broke her financially." Jocelyn stared out the window at the passing landscape. "She used to say that poor people don't get justice. They get whatever justice they can afford. Sarah used to say something similar. That's why she wanted to build the legal aid clinic." They were interrupted by Harrison's phone ringing. The caller ID showed Judge Patricia Webb, and Harrison answered with some trepidation. Judge Webb presided over most of the family court cases in their jurisdiction, and her reputation for no-nonsense efficiency was legendary. "Harrison? Pat Webb. I heard through the grapevine that you might be taking on some family law cases." Harrison shot a questioning look at Jocelyn. "Word travels fast. I just met with a potential client this afternoon. Maria Rodriguez, Judge." Webb said matter-of-factly. "Her former neighbor called my office. Said Sarah Brooks's husband was looking into custody modification. Is that accurate?" "It is. I'm planning to file a motion to modify the original custody order based on changed circumstances." "Good." The single word carried weight. "I presided over the original case, Harrison. I've regretted that outcome for 2 years." The substitute. Counsel was well-meaning but unprepared, and that family deserved better representation. Harrison pulled into his driveway, processing this unexpected development. "Judge Webb, I'm calling because I want you to know that there are others in this community who've been thinking about what Sarah was trying to do. Dr. Amy Chun from the university's social work department has been researching family court outcomes for low-income families. Attorney Rebecca Foster has been looking for ways to expand pro bono services. Even some of the court clerks have been talking about how to better support unrepresented litigants." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe Sarah's vision doesn't have to die with her. Maybe there are enough people who care about justice to make her legal aid clinic idea work." Judge Webb paused. "Would you be interested in hosting a meeting, informal conversation about possibilities?" Harrison looked at Jocelyn, who had been listening to the conversation with growing excitement. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow evening?" "I could make some calls, see who might be available for a preliminary discussion." "Judge Webb, I should mention that I'm not doing this alone. I have a partner in this effort, Sergeant Jocelyn Stone. She's been instrumental in helping me understand what Sarah was trying to accomplish. Military background? Marine Corps. She understands investigations, evidence gathering, client advocacy from a different perspective. Even better, we need people who understand how systems work and how they sometimes fail the people they're supposed to serve." After hanging up, Harrison and Jocelyn sat in the car for a moment, processing what had just happened. "That was surreal," Harrison said finally. "That was momentum," Jocelyn corrected. That was what happens when you start doing work that matters. Other people who care about the same things find their way to you. Chloe emerged from the front door of the house, having been dropped off by her after-school babysitter, and waved enthusiastically at them through the windshield. "Are you ready for this?" Harrison asked Jocelyn as they prepared to go inside, and explained to an 8-year-old that their quiet household was about to become the headquarters for something much larger. "Are you kidding?" Jocelyn smiled, and Harrison realized it was the first time he'd seen her look genuinely excited about the future. "I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know what this was until now." As they walked toward the house where Chloe was waiting with homework questions and dinner suggestions, Harrison felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, the sense that he was moving toward something meaningful rather than just away from something painful. Tomorrow evening, his living room would fill with strangers who shared Sarah's vision of justice. Next week, he would file his first family law motion in 15 years. Next month, Maria Rodriguez might be reunited with her children. And somewhere along the way, he and Jocelyn had stopped being two broken people, sharing temporary shelter, and had become partners in something that could change lives. The ripple effect had begun. The emergency call came at 5:47 a.m. on Saturday morning, 3 hours before the planned meeting that was supposed to launch Sarah's legal aid clinic vision into reality. Harrison jolted awake to his phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand, the display showing Maria Rodriguez's number. "Mr. Brooks." Maria's voice was tight with panic, speaking rapid Spanish before switching to English. "I'm sorry to call so early, but they came to my apartment, the police, with papers. They say I have to go to court on Monday or they will arrest me." Harrison sat up, instantly alert. "Slow down, Maria. What kind of papers? Who sent them?" "My ex-husband, he filed something, emergency motion, they call it, says I am." "How do you say contempt of court?" "Because I hired you without telling him first." Her voice broke. "They say if I don't appear, they will issue a warrant." Harrison was already reaching for his laptop, his mind racing through the legal implications. "Maria, I need you to read me exactly what the papers say word for word." As Maria read through the legal documents, Harrison felt cold anger building in his chest. Robert Rodriguez hadn't just filed an emergency motion, he'd orchestrated a calculated legal ambush designed to intimidate Maria into backing down from the custody modification. The contempt charge was spurious, based on a misinterpretation of divorce decree language, but it would require an immediate response and could derail their case before it even began. "Maria, listen to me carefully," Harrison said, pulling on clothes with one hand while holding the phone with the other. "This is a scare tactic. You haven't done anything wrong. But we need to respond quickly and professionally." "I don't understand. How can he do this?" "I just want my children back." "Because he has a lawyer who knows how to use the system as a weapon," Harrison said grimly. "But so do we. I'm going to make some calls, and then I'm coming to get you. We're going to spend today preparing a response that will not only defeat this motion, but strengthen our custody case." After hanging up, Harrison found Jocelyn already dressed and making coffee in the kitchen. She'd obviously heard his end of the conversation. "Legal ambush?" she asked without preamble. "The worst kind. Ex-husband is trying to intimidate Maria into dropping the custody modification by filing a bogus contempt motion that requires an emergency court appearance." Harrison accepted the coffee gratefully. "It's brilliant, actually. Even if we defeat the motion, it burns time, money, and emotional energy that Maria doesn't have. What do you need me to do?" Harrison looked at her, this woman who had stumbled into his life by accident and somehow become indispensable to everything he was trying to build. "I need you to call Judge Webb and the others who were supposed to come to the meeting today. Explain what's happening, see if anyone can help with research or preparation. And the meeting? We'll have to postpone. No, Jocelyn's voice was firm. We don't postpone, we adapt. If these people really want to help build something meaningful, they need to see what that looks like when the pressure is on. She was right, and Harrison realized that her military background was showing the ability to adjust tactics without abandoning the mission. You want to turn our legal aid clinic planning meeting into a war room session for Maria's case? I want to show everyone who walks through that door today that this isn't just about good intentions and committee meetings. This is about real people facing real crises who need real help right now. By 9 a.m., Harrison's living room had been transformed into something resembling a legal command center. Maria sat at the kitchen table with Chloe, who had appointed herself as official tissue provider and handholder. Judge Webb arrived first, took one look at the organized chaos, and rolled up her sleeves. "What do you need?" she asked simply. Doctor. Amy Chun from the university brought 3 graduate students, who began researching case law precedents on contempt motions in family court. Attorney Rebecca Foster showed up with another lawyer Harrison didn't recognize, Emma Santos. She introduced herself. "I handle domestic relations cases, and I've dealt with Robert Rodriguez's attorney before. He's a bully who relies on intimidation tactics." What had been planned as a casual exploratory meeting became an intensive legal clinic focused on Maria's case. People who had never met before were collaborating with the efficiency of a team that had worked together for years, united by the common goal of preventing an injustice. Jocelyn moved through the organized chaos like a battlefield commander, coordinating research efforts, managing information flow, and keeping everyone focused on the mission objective. She'd set up a timeline on the dining room wall, mapping out every task that needed to be completed before Monday's court appearance. "We need character witnesses," she announced to the room at large. "People who can testify to Maria's stability, work ethic, commitment to her children." "I'll handle that," Dr. Chun volunteered. "My students can conduct interviews, prepare affidavits. We also need documentation of the ex-husband's changed circumstances," Emma Santos added. "Financial records, employment history, anything that supports our argument that his situation has deteriorated." "On it," said another voice from the corner. Harrison looked up to see a man he didn't recognize, tall, graying, wearing a casual sweater. Judge Webb noticed his confusion. "Harrison, meet Detective Lieutenant Mike Torres, retired. He's been doing private investigation work since leaving the force. Pro bono cases only." Torres nodded at Harrison. "Judge Webb called me this morning, explained the situation. I've already pulled public records on Robert Rodriguez. Bankruptcy filing 8 months ago, 2 arrests for disorderly conduct, eviction. Notice from his current apartment. This guy's life is falling apart." By noon, they had assembled a comprehensive response to the contempt motion that was stronger than anything Harrison could have prepared on his own. More importantly, they had demonstrated to Maria and to each other that the legal aid clinic concept wasn't just theoretical. "This is what Sarah envisioned," Judge Webb said quietly to Harrison as they worked on finalizing the court documents. "Not just lawyers providing free services, but a community of people committed to justice working together." Maria had been quiet for most of the morning, overwhelmed by the coordinated effort being made on her behalf. Finally, she stood up in the middle of the bustling room and spoke in a voice that carried despite its softness. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, looking around at faces that had been strangers 12 hours earlier. "For 2 years, I felt so alone. Like no one cared about my children except me. Now." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood. Chloe, who had been observing the adult activity with 8-year-old fascination, spoke up from her perch at the kitchen counter. "Dad, is this what Mom wanted to do? Help people like Mrs. Rodriguez?" Harrison looked at his daughter, then at the room full of people who had given up their Saturday to fight for a family they'd never met. "Yes, sweetheart, This is exactly what Mom wanted to do." "Good," Chloe said with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child. "She would be proud of you." As the day wound down and people began to leave, making plans to reconvene on Monday for the court appearance, Harrison found himself standing in his front hallway with Jocelyn. "This morning, when Maria called, I was terrified," he admitted. "Not just about losing the case, but about letting everyone down. About proving that I wasn't ready for this kind of responsibility. And now?" Harrison looked around his house, which still bore traces of the organized chaos that had consumed the day. Legal documents scattered across surfaces, empty coffee mugs abandoned on various tables, a whiteboard covered with strategic notes in multiple handwritings. "Now I feel like we can handle whatever comes next," he said. "Not just me, all of us." Jocelyn smiled. "That's what happens when you stop trying to carry everything alone." Monday's court appearance was a victory that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. The contempt motion was dismissed. Robert Rodriguez's attorney was sanctioned for filing frivolous paperwork, and Judge Webb granted Harrison's request for an expedited hearing on the custody modification. But the real victory had happened on Saturday, in a living room full of strangers who had become allies, proving that Sarah's vision of community supported justice wasn't just idealistic dreaming, it was a practical necessity that could change lives. The crisis had tested them, and they had not just survived but emerged stronger, more unified, and more committed to the work ahead. The custody hearing for Maria Rodriguez was scheduled for the following Thursday, and the newly formed legal aid team had spent the week preparing with the intensity of a military operation. Harrison's house had become an unofficial headquarters, with people coming and going at all hours, the dining room table permanently covered with case files and legal documents, and the coffee maker working overtime. By Wednesday evening, they were as ready as they could be. The witnesses were prepared, the evidence was organized, and Emma Santos had uncovered additional documentation of Robert Rodriguez's deteriorating circumstances that would strengthen their case considerably. Maria had spent the afternoon practicing her testimony with Dr. Chun, and even Judge Webb had stopped by to offer informal guidance on courtroom procedure. As the last of the team members left for the night, Harrison found himself alone with Jocelyn in the sudden quiet of his house. Chloe had fallen asleep on the living room couch an hour earlier, exhausted by the week's excitement, and they'd carried her upstairs to bed without waking her. "I should probably head to my hotel," Jocelyn said, but she made no move toward the door. She'd been staying at the Thornfield Inn since their impromptu legal clinic had expanded into a week-long operation, claiming she didn't want to impose on Harrison's hospitality any longer than necessary. "You don't have to go," Harrison said quietly. "I mean, if you want to stay, the guest room is still available." They stood in the hallway, neither quite meeting the other's eyes, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them over the past week, but neither quite ready to name it. Working together so intensively, watching each other navigate crisis and uncertainty, had created an intimacy that went beyond their initial connection over shared grief. "Harrison," Jocelyn said finally, "I need to tell you something." He waited, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she seemed to be gathering courage for whatever she was about to say. "I'm supposed to report back to my unit in 2 weeks, she said. "My medical leave is ending. They expect me to return to active duty." The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. He'd known, intellectually, that Jocelyn's presence in his life was temporary, but somewhere in the intensity of building the legal aid clinic and preparing Maria's case, he'd stopped thinking about her leaving. 2 weeks, he repeated. "I could request an extension, but that would require medical documentation that I'm not ready to return to service. And the truth is ... double quote." She paused, took a breath. "The truth is, I am ready, or I was ready until this week. What changed?" Jocelyn looked around his house, taking in the evidence of their collaborative effort, the legal documents, the empty coffee mugs, the whiteboard still covered with strategic notes. This changed. What we've built here, what we're doing for Maria and her family, what we're planning for the future. I've never been part of something that felt this important. Harrison stepped closer, close enough to see the conflict in her eyes. So request the extension. It's not that simple. If I stay, I'd be staying for you. For this, for something that might not work out the way we hope it will. She looked directly at him. I'd be giving up everything I've worked for, everything I've been, for the possibility of becoming something different. And that scares you. It terrifies me, she admitted. I've been a Marine for 10 years. It's not just what I do, it's who I am. Without the uniform, without the structure, without the mission, I don't know who I am. Harrison understood the fear in her voice because he'd felt it himself, the terror of letting go of familiar identity, even when that identity had become a prison. You're someone who drove to Vermont to process grief and ended up helping rebuild a stranger's life. You're someone who turned a legal crisis into a community mobilization. You're someone who sees what needs to be done and finds a way to do it. Those are things I've done, not who I am. Maybe they're the same thing, Harrison said gently. Maybe. Who we are is just the sum of our choices. And you've been making extraordinary choices since the moment you decided to stay that first night. Jocelyn was quiet for a long moment, then said, I need to know what I'm choosing. If I stay, if I leave the Marines, if I commit to building this legal aid clinic with you, ... What are we to each other? The question hung in the air between them, like a challenge. Harrison realized they'd reached the moment he'd been both anticipating and dreading. The moment when they had to acknowledge what had been growing between them and decide whether to nurture it or let it remain unspoken. I don't know, he said honestly. I know that I wake up every morning looking forward to working with you. I know that when you're not here, the house feels empty in a way it hasn't since Sarah died. I know that what we've built together feels more meaningful than anything I've done in years. That's not the same as love. No, Harrison agreed. But it might be the foundation for love, if we're brave enough to build on it. Jocelyn stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. I haven't been brave about anything personal in a long time. Military courage is different. It's about training and duty and following orders. This is about choosing to trust someone with your heart when you know how much it hurts to lose someone you love. I know, Harrison said softly. I've been living with that fear for 2 years. But I've also learned that avoiding love doesn't make losing it hurt less. It just makes you miss all the joy that comes before the loss. What if we're wrong about this? What if what we're feeling is just two broken people leaning on each other while we heal? Then we'll figure it out together, Harrison said. But I don't think we're wrong. I think we're two people who've learned how precious love is because we've experienced losing it. I think we're ready to choose hope over fear. Jocelyn reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. I've been carrying Miguel's death like a weight for 6 months. But working with you, helping Maria, being part of something bigger than my own grief. It's the first time I felt useful instead of just broken. You were never broken, Harrison said. You were just interrupted. And now you're writing a new chapter. We're writing a new chapter, she corrected. If I stay, if we choose this. Harrison covered her hand with his own. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you, and the work we're doing, and the possibility that we can build something beautiful together. But I need you to choose it too, not because you're afraid to go back to the Marines, but because you want to be here. Jocelyn smiled, and Harrison realized it was the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her. I want to be here. I want to help Maria get her children back. I want to build Sarah's legal aid clinic. I want to see what happens when we stop being afraid of happiness. And us? What do you want for us? I want to find out if partnership can become love, she said simply. I want to risk my heart one more time, with someone who understands that love is both fragile and worth fighting for. Harrison kissed her then, gentle and tentative, and when she kissed him back, it felt like coming home after a long journey through unfamiliar territory. Not the desperate passion of people trying to forget their pain, but the careful tenderness of people ready to remember what it felt like to hope for the future. When they broke apart, Jocelyn rested her forehead against his. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too," Harrison admitted. "But I'm more scared of letting you leave without telling you that I love you." "I love you too," she said, and the words felt like a promise they were both ready to keep. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside Harrison's house, two people who had thought their stories were over realized they were just beginning the most important chapter of their lives. 6 months later, on a warm Thursday morning in early June, Harrison stood in the courthouse hallway watching Maria Rodriguez emerge from the family courtroom with tears streaming down her face and 3 children clinging to her like they never intended to let go again. Miguel, now 16 and nearly as tall as his mother, had his arm around her shoulders. Ana, 14 and fiercely protective, held her hand while glaring at anyone who looked their way. And Carlos, 12 years old and shy, pressed against his mother's side like he was trying to disappear into her embrace. "Mama," Carlos whispered in Spanish, and the word carried 2 years' worth of longing. Judge Webb emerged from the courtroom behind them, her usually stern expression softened by something that might have been satisfaction. She nodded at Harrison with professional approval, but he caught the quick smile she tried to hide. "Full custody restored," she said quietly. "Effective immediately. Mr. Rodriguez has supervised visitation rights, pending his completion of court-ordered counseling and financial stability evaluation." Harrison felt the tension he'd been carrying for months finally release from his shoulders. They'd won. After 6 months of legal maneuvering, character witnesses, psychological evaluations, and 3 separate court hearings, Maria Rodriguez was going home with all 3 of her children. "Thank you," Maria said, looking at Harrison with eyes that held more gratitude than he knew how to accept. "You gave me back my family." "You never lost your family," Harrison replied. "We just helped the system remember that." Jocelyn appeared beside him, having spent the morning coordinating with Detective Torres on a new case, a domestic violence survivor who needed help securing a protective order. She wore civilian clothes now, a simple blue dress that made her look more like a social worker than a former Marine sergeant, but she still moved with the purposeful efficiency that Harrison had fallen in love with. "How did it go?" she asked, though the celebration in the hallway had already answered her question. "Home," Ana Rodriguez said firmly, speaking directly to Jocelyn. "We're going home." The Family First legal initiative had officially opened its doors 3 months earlier, operating out of a converted storefront on Main Street that Judge Webb had helped them secure at below-market rent. What had started as Sarah's vision and grown into an emergency response to Maria's crisis had evolved into something neither Harrison nor Jocelyn had imagined possible. They now had 4 attorneys working regular pro bono hours, 2 full-time social workers funded by a federal grant that Dr. Chun had helped them secure, and a network of volunteer advocates that included everyone from retired teachers to college students studying social justice. Detective Torres had joined them as an official investigator, and even Mrs. Henderson had transitioned from Harrison's law firm to become the clinic's office manager. But more than the official structure, they'd built something that felt like family. Every Thursday, the core team gathered for dinner at Harrison's house, what Chloe had dubbed Legal Aid Family Night, to debrief the week's cases and plan strategy for upcoming challenges. The dining room table that had once felt too large for just Harrison and Chloe now regularly accommodated 8 or 10 people, voices overlapping in passionate discussion about justice and advocacy and the small victories that changed individual lives. As they walked out of the courthouse that morning, Harrison's phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Pizza party tonight to celebrate Mrs. R getting her kids back? I already invited everyone. Love you. Harrison showed the message to Jocelyn, who laughed. Your daughter has become quite the social coordinator. She's learned that good news should be shared, Harrison replied. I think she missed having a house full of people who cared about each other. They'd been careful with Chloe, introducing changes gradually and making sure she understood that Jocelyn's presence didn't diminish her mother's memory. But Chloe had embraced Jocelyn with the uncomplicated acceptance of a child who recognized genuine kindness, and their relationship had grown into something beautiful, not a replacement for what she'd lost, but in addition to what she had. Evening celebration at Harrison's house was everything Chloe had promised and more. Maria's children, initially shy in the crowd of strangers who had fought for their family, gradually relaxed as they realized that everyone present had played a role in bringing them home. Miguel found himself in deep conversation with one of Dr. Chun's graduate students about college applications. Ana appointed herself as Chloe's unofficial big sister, braiding her hair while they planned summer activities. Carlos discovered Harrison's collection of law books and spent an hour asking questions about justice and fairness that were both innocent and profound. He wants to be a lawyer, Maria told Harrison quietly as they watched her youngest son carefully examining a legal textbook. He says he wants to help families like ours. The world needs more lawyers who understand what injustice feels like, Harrison replied. When he's ready, we'll make sure he gets every opportunity. As the evening wound down and families began to leave, Harrison found himself on the back porch with Jocelyn, watching the sunset paint the Vermont mountains in shades of gold and purple. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments at the end of chaotic days, processing what they'd accomplished and planning what came next. I got a call today, Jocelyn said, her voice carefully neutral, from my former commanding officer. Harrison felt his stomach tighten. Despite her decision to request extended leave and eventually transition to civilian life, Jocelyn's relationship with the Marines remained complicated. What did he want? To congratulate me, actually. Apparently, the story of what we're doing here has reached some people in Washington. There's talk of using our model as a template for veteran transition programs, helping former military personnel find meaningful civilian careers in community service. That's incredible. They want me to consult on the program design. Not active duty, just civilian consultation. Help other veterans figure out how to translate military skills into social justice work. Jocelyn smiled. Turns out my commanding officer wasn't as disappointed in me as I thought. He said losing Miguel taught me something about leadership that I couldn't have learned any other way. Harrison reached for her hand. Miguel would be proud of what you've built in his memory. We've built, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of this alone. From inside the house came the sound of Chloe's laughter mixed with Carlos Rodriguez's shy giggles as they discovered some shared joke. The Family First legal initiative had helped reunite a family, but it had also created new connections that extended far beyond legal representation. Do you ever wonder what Sarah would think of all this? Jocelyn asked. Harrison considered the question. He'd stopped talking to Sarah's memory months ago, not because he loved her less, but because he'd finally learned the difference between honoring someone's legacy and being paralyzed by their absence. I think she'd be amazed by how much bigger it became than anything she originally envisioned, he said finally. She dreamed of helping a few families get legal representation. We've built something that changes how the entire community thinks about justice. Justice. And us? What would she think about us? Harrison smiled, remembering Sarah's fierce belief that love multiplied rather than divided, that the heart's capacity for caring grew stronger with use rather than weaker. I think she'd be glad that her death led to life instead of just more death, that her vision became reality not because I preserved everything exactly as she left it, but because I was brave enough to let it grow into something new. Judge Webb had been right that day in the Courthouse Maria's case had proven that Sarah's legal aid clinic concept wasn't just idealistic dreaming but practical necessity. In 6 months, they'd handled 12 custody cases, 4 domestic violence protective orders, 2 wrongful termination suits, and countless smaller interventions that had prevented legal problems from becoming family crises. But more than the case statistics, they'd proven that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they chose to work together instead of struggling alone. "I have something for you," Harrison said, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. Jocelyn unwrapped it carefully, revealing a simple silver pendant, not an engagement ring. They'd agreed they weren't ready for that step yet. But something more meaningful than jewelry. Engraved on the pendant were 2 dates: the day Miguel Santos died, and the day the Family First Legal Initiative had opened its doors. "For remembering that endings can become beginnings," Harrison said, "that the people we've lost would want us to keep building something beautiful." Jocelyn fastened the pendant around her neck, her fingers tracing the engraved dates. "I love you, Harrison Brooks." "I love you too, Jocelyn Stone." As they sat together in the gathering twilight, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance across the yard where Chloe and Carlos were still playing, Harrison realized that happiness had snuck up on him. Not the desperate, grasping happiness of someone trying to forget pain, but the quiet, sustainable happiness of someone who had learned to honor loss while still choosing hope. The radio call that had brought Jocelyn into his life had indeed changed everything, not because it had erased their grief, but because it had taught them that broken people could help heal each other, that individual acts of kindness could grow into movements for justice, and that love didn't end with death, but found new ways to express itself through the lives of those who remained. Tomorrow, there would be new cases, new families in crisis, new challenges that would test their resolve and their resources. But tonight, in a house full of laughter and second chances, with a woman beside him who understood both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of hope, Harrison Brooks was exactly where he belonged. The snow had long since melted, the locked doors had been opened, and the broken radio that had started it all sat in a place of honor on the legal aid clinic's bookshelf, a reminder that sometimes the most important calls are the ones that connect us to our purpose, our community, and our capacity to transform pain into something beautiful. In Thornfield Valley, Vermont, Sarah Brooks's dream had become reality. Miguel Santos's death had gained meaning, and 2 people who thought their fighting days were over had discovered that the most important battles were just beginning. Sometimes, love doesn't announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it grows quietly in courthouse hallways and community meetings, in shared purpose and vulnerable choices, in the space between grief and hope where healing lives. Sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that remind us we can always write a new chapter, even when we think the book is closed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.